Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight, I'm honored to be joined by former FBI Special Agent Julia Cowley. Julia served in the Behavioral Analyst Unit, where she works on the most complex and high profile cases in the country. In this episode, we'll talk about her background and career in the BAU, her insights into the Golden State Killer investigation, her thoughts on the Gilgo Beach case, and her transition from law enforcement into podcasting with her show, The Consult. Julia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Cameron.
Julia, so I wanted to, when I was thinking back about all you've done in your career, and we're going to hit on some of those highlights today, but I wanted to start off with just some basic questions on how did you get to that point? So where did you grow up at?
I grew up on the West Coast and I spent some of my childhood in Northern California. Then we migrated north to Oregon, which is where I went to middle school and high school and to college. So I consider Oregon my home state.
So when you were in high school and you're looking at careers, was the FBI at the top of the list for your ultimate goal, or?
No, it wasn't. I was an avid true crime reader, but it wasn't until later on in high school when I was trying to figure out what I would major in college that I decided that forensic science that would be what I would want to do. And I don't know how old you are, but I'm probably older. But back in those days, there were these big books, big thick books that you get at bookstores that had lists of all different college majors. And I was reading through it just thinking, what am I going to do with my life? I don't like anything. I like sports and I like to read true crime. So what can you do with that? And I wasn't going to be a professional athlete by any means. So I found what was called police science. And I read the description of what that was. And that was basically what we know as forensic science. I thought, that's what I want to do. I think that was the moment I knew right away. That's what I want to do. Is no looking back. And they didn't really have forensic science programs when I was looking at colleges. So I did the next best thing and I majored in chemistry. And that was what gave me the scientific background for working in a crime lab. So that's how I got interested, and just avid reader of true crime. It's my passion. It's all I ever wanted to read. It was the only thing that could truly keep my focus for a great length of time.
Was there any cases when you were younger that you were, more obsessed with or interested in than others?
Yes, definitely Helter Skelter, because that was the first book, or the Manson murders, I should say. But I read Helter Skelter. It was the first true crime book I ever read. Another case that I followed closely because it did happen in Oregon was Diane Downs, and she was convicted of murdering her two of her children, or murdering one of her children, and shooting her two other children who survived. And that was a big case in Oregon. So I followed that one pretty closely. I liked Fatal Vision, which was written by Joe McGinnis, and it was about a Green Beret who killed his family. So Jeffrey McDonald was his
Yeah,
name. So that was
in North
another
Carolina.
case.
Yep.
Another case that I was fascinated by. There's so many. I would go to the bookstore and look at the shelf, and I remember at some point just realizing I've read every book on this shelf. So there are just so many cases that I was interested in. But those are the ones that I think of that really, like Diane Downs, that was a really big deal when I was growing up in Oregon.
So you eventually decided to get a job to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations. Why Tennessee? Did you have family there?
No,
They just have a
no,
job opening?
just a job opening. So I had applied all over the country, different crime labs that were hiring or that had openings. And typically, how it would work is you would apply to the state and you'd get on like a list and you get a ranking. And when your name came up, you might get an interview. So you could see how long a process could be. And Tennessee was basically the first agency. It was the second agency that interviewed me, but it was the first agency that offered me a job. And I'm like, I'm going because it was an ideal position for me because not only would I be working in a crime lab, but I would also be a member of the crime scene team that they were putting together. So we'd go out to the crime scenes and process them, collect the evidence, which not a lot of crime labs did at the time, that where they'd send their forensic scientists out to the scene. Some of them would just have separate units where they'd have technicians that would go out. So this was just an opportunity I couldn't pass up, and it was the best decision I ever made.
Was that a sworn position or were you
Yes,
non-sworn?
I was a sworn special agent with the TBI.
Very cool.
My
So you
official
went
title,
through.
yeah, my official title was special agent forensic scientist,
Okay,
and
cool.
I did go through a type of police academy. We did not, despite being sworn officers and carrying weapons, we did not have the same training at the time as the regular criminal investigators that went out into the field to manage the investigation. So we had a different type of training, but we had enough training that we could be sworn officers.
So when did you decide to apply for the FBI?
I had been at the lab for a few years and I had a colleague who applied before me, a couple years before me, and he joined, and he was a somewhat of a mentor to me. So he encouraged me. But I was already thinking along those lines because I had read John Douglas's Mindhunter. So
Oh,
I became very interested in behavioral analysis, and I thought that's what I want to do someday. Like I really liked the lab work, but I also thought that I would just love to be an FBI profiler. And so my colleague encouraged me to apply. So a couple years later, I ended up applying, and that's how I made the decision. It wasn't something that I had considered until I'd been with TBI for a few years.
so the FBI Academy for you, was it more just like a graduate college level classes with a little running and push-ups? Was it a gentleman's course, or are they yelling at you and, having like a smoke session?
It some of the instructors yelled, some everybody had a different style. So the academy was pretty intensive. It is not as, let's say, as militaristic maybe as a police academy because they're not like constantly screaming at you. The students at the FBI Academy tend to be older because most of us, I should say most of us, all of us had already had careers. We were professionals already. So it's a very different environment, a different student. Usually in police academies, they're much younger. Some
Right.
are just right out of high school. So it's a different age group. And many people had families already, were married, so, but it was pretty intensive. It was classroom work where you'd have to study for tests. They weren't that hard, but you had to study there because a lot of it was information maybe you didn't know, like legal things or just topics about certain types of investigations and violations that the FBI would work that if you don't study, you're not going to know. So, then we had firearms training, defensive tactics, tactical vehicle operations. What else? Um, I'm sure I'm missing something, but it was it was a very intensive practical applications where we'd go out to Hogan's Alley, which is the mock city where we'd practice arrests and car chases and things like that. So it was I learned a lot. I loved it. I was glad to be done with it. I was really tired at the end, but I thought it was really good training. I felt once I left the academy, I felt pretty good about some of the skills that I had at that time. I mean, I knew they were certainly going to further develop once I got out into the field, but it was um, it was a great experience for me. I know that some people don't have that experience, but I had a really good time. I
Was there
shouldn't say it
anything
like that.
Yeah. Was there anything that you struggled with or that was difficult for you, or did you
No, I not really. I guess the defensive tactics, some of the wrestling and the boxing was new to me. I mean, I had brothers, so I was used to fighting with them, but this was different. I mean, you had to, learn certain moves and things like that. And that was all kind of different. I was used to fighting dirty against my brothers. Yeah. So I remember having to box against a guy who was much bigger than me, and I think he had like a like jujitsu background or judo or something. And
Right.
he was helping me. Like, he wasn't being particularly tough on me, but he was like, okay, get your arms up. And I just remember him kind of trying to coach me. And then he hit me really hard in the face. And I don't think he even meant to hit me that hard, but I had like a migraine for several days. So that was probably the part that I struggled with. But the physical fitness, I was fit when I entered the academy. The academics were not difficult if you studied firearms. I had already carried a firearm with TBI, so I wouldn't say I was completely comfortable, but I'd already had some training in that. And a lot of FBI agents start out, and some of them have never even held a weapon or shot a weapon before. So I had that advantage. So I don't think I really struggled with too much. I think what I struggled with was being maybe homesick and just extremely tired through throughout the whole thing.
So first assignment, you obviously do not get to go straight to the BAU.
No.
Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So my first office, so at the academy, you basically list out 1 through 56, all the 56 field offices, like your number one choice down to number 56, which is not easy to do. So
Do you remember what the number 1 was and what number 50
yes,
was?
uh, well, number one was Knoxville, which is where I processed out of. I knew I wouldn't go back because they always told you don't get sent back to the office where you process out of. So, but I put Knoxville anyway. So Knoxville number one. I tried to keep it kind of on the East Coast because my husband is from the East Coast and he didn't want to go back out to the West Coast or be in the Midwest. So I tried to keep everything kind of in the Mid Atlantic and Northeastern area. And so those were mostly my choices, or that, I just tried to stick to certain areas of the country. Boston was number 16 on my list, and that ended up being my first office. Really, my only office, other than when I went to BAU, and then I spent some time in the laboratory as well. But yeah, it's the only field office I ever worked in.
And what were you assigned to initially? I know it was white collar
Bank
crime,
fraud.
right?
Bank fraud.
Bank fraud, right.
Yeah, not not something that I dreamed of, but still, I knew joining the FBI might not get my first choice on anything, and usually you don't. You're pretty lucky if you get exactly what you want when you first walk in the doors of the FBI.
Yeah, so I'm sure that they're just filling up the gaps as far as where they need it
Needs of the
people and
bureau.
right.
Needs of the
And
bureau. Yeah, it's almost like it doesn't matter what your background is or what you want to do. if Boston had an opening on the bank fraud squad and I was the next name on the list, I was going to fill that opening. And that's typically how the FBI works.
Yeah, and I assume that that's good anyway to learn how to manage a caseload and do some basic, well, they're advanced investigations, but still, get your feet wet a little bit. How long were you in that position for?
About 3 years.
And
Yeah.
then you're able to apply to the BAU?
No, I didn't apply the BAU for 10 years.
Okay, I thought it
So,
was longer. So is there
yeah,
a
it's a long
minimum requirement for that?
pardon?
Is there a minimum requirement for the BAU, or is it just whenever we have an opening?
So, there's no minimum requirement, but you have to apply for the position you want. So, depending on the unit you want to be in, and at the time there are 3 different units, and I wanted to be in the crimes against adults unit. So, you have to write it's called, I forget. It's like you fill out like an application. It's basically all these criteria, and you have to write examples of how you have succeeded in those criteria or how you demonstrate. So, for example, it could be leadership skills, judgment, um, criminal investigation. Give an example, and basically you just write about 1,500 words about what the problem was, what you did, and what was the outcome, and how does that demonstrate the competency that you are trying to write to. And it is a very tedious application to say the least. And so you can't do that application without having a significant amount of investigative experience already. It would be impossible because there's like 2 examples for each criteria, and there's like 6 criteria, and you just can't. I guess you could make it up and you'd be found out because they verify. You have to put somebody who can verify, like a supervisor or somebody who will vouch, yes, this really did happen, this person really did do the things that they say they did on this particular case. But to be able to think of that many scenarios, basically, you have to have a great deal of experience already. And so minimum of about 10 years is when you probably have enough experience to apply for a promotion to a unit like the BAU. So after bank fraud, I spent the next 7 or 8 years on public corruption and civil rights.
Okay. And once you get selected to the BAU, I'd assume that there is a training that you go to as well.
Yes. So it's it was also 16 weeks. The FBI Academy was about 16 weeks. This is also a 16-week training program just of classroom. And you have different topics that you learn about, whether it's abnormal psychology, forensic medicine, crimes against children. I mean, there's all sorts of different topics, and we have experts from both inside the FBI and inside BAU, and also outside the FBI that come in and provide training to us. And so it's 16 weeks all day long in a classroom. And what they usually do is, as new profilers come in, they wait until they have a large enough group and they train them all at once. So I just happened to come in at a time where they had hired a number of people. So I got there, and basically within a couple months, we started our training program, and we would go to classes. And some of the BAU classes might have only had 3 new profilers, and my class had 10.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so which was a large class. They were filling a lot of spots. So that's 16 weeks. And then you have another, depending on how diligent you are, another year or 2 of kind of on the job training where you work cases alongside other certified FBI profilers. And you have to work a certain number of cases a certain type of cases, and you have to work cases in each of the units, even if you're not going to be going to that unit. So I had to work cases involving terrorism and threats and crimes against children, as well as the cases in my own unit.
When you got out of training, do you remember the first case that you were assigned?
I do. Yeah. It was the murder of a young man named Philip DiMartino in San Francisco. That was in 2010 when he was
And
murdered. And that was my first assignment. I remember I was basically packing up. I think I want to say, if I'm remembering this very carefully, it was either the day we finished our course, our coursework, and I was leaving for the night, or it was like the next day, and my supervisor said, "Oh, don't go home quite yet. I have a case that just came in," and it was this case. And Philip had been stabbed multiple times and found in his apartment in San Francisco. And at the time, the San Francisco Police Department was, I think what they were trying to do is make sure that they were not dealing with a serial offender, because Philip was a gay man and there had been another stabbing of a gay man in San Francisco. And I think I don't think the police department thought they were related, but they wanted to have outside agency take a look and tell them what we thought.
and since you're in more of a assist role, is in every case, is there a lead FBI agent and then you're also involved and you're working in tandem, or is it that you are working with the department that is requesting you?
So it's kind of a combination. So each of the field offices have what we call an NCAVC coordinator, and that's the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, which is what the BAUs fall under. So this coordinator is the liaison between the BAUs and the local law enforcement in their area of responsibility. So I'll work with that FBI agent. And then, of course, that FBI agent will put me in touch with the state and local police departments. And every case and every coordinator, it's different. You may have more interaction with a coordinator. Other coordinators step back and you have direct interaction just with the police department. So this was a combination of working with the NCAVC coordinator and the San Francisco Police Department at the time. But that's typically how it works. And so when I need documentation, it's that person who's the coordinator that will help gather what I need, get it to me, and kind of run. I don't want to say interference, but they are, our voices there in that particular division, since we can't always be there in person.
Okay, and I always wonder that too, as far as when you're gathering information. I didn't know if you were looking at like Comstat reports, or are you like how how are you gathering all that data? Is
Yeah.
that so you've got an in between that's getting that for you?
Usually.
Okay.
Yes, that's it, but not always. Sometimes the police, you get to like I guess it really just depends on that particular coordinator, on the situation, how busy they are, how involved they want to be. So sometimes I'll get it directly from the police department. Sometimes the coordinator will be involved throughout the entire investigation. Sometimes they'll say, "I'm just going to hand it off to you. You can have direct contact." It really just depends on that person. So and how much they want to be involved, and how much do they have time to be involved. So so either they'll gather the information, or I'll talk directly with the detective, and the detective would send it directly to me. Sometimes it was just sent through email or digital. Sometimes it would be paper files of
Right.
documents that they would put in a big binder and send it off to us. So it's every case is different. Every working relationship that you have with police departments, they were just all different.
So that kind of brings me to Golden State. How long were you in BAU before you were assigned the lead on Golden State? And we're talking about Joseph
Mhm.
DeAngelo for those that are listening that don't know.
I don't remember how long. It was not all that long. I was
I know.
certified.
Okay.
I had gone through the training. I was a certified FBI profiler. I had already worked on a number of other cases. I had not been the lead on a serial murder case. Despite what people think of, we don't have a lot of serial murder cases that are
Right.
ongoing all the time at BAU. So it's kind of like they're few and far between. So it was still fairly early on, and my boss called me in and asked if I'd ever heard of the East Area rapist, or he started to say East Area, and I said, East Area rapist, I'll take it. I knew exactly what case it was. I had followed the case from the time I saw it on TV during it was on A&E. They had done a show on this particular series of crimes, and I remember watching it in 2004 and being fascinated by it because I hadn't really known that there had been such a prolific offender, because there had not been a linkage done until 2001 where they linked a bunch of serial rape cases to some serial homicides. And the serial rape cases were in up in the Sacramento area in Northern California, and the murders were down in Southern California. So it wasn't in 2001 until they were actually linked. So it kind of flew under the radar. And it wasn't until about 2004 where I had, seen this show and had a better understanding of the scope of this individual's crimes. And it wasn't until probably I'm gonna say it, and I would have to verify this. It's maybe 2011, where all the agencies got together and formed a working group, and the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office asked for the assistance from the BAU, and that's when the NCAVC coordinators from the Sacramento division of the FBI reached out to us and requested assistance. So
So when you get cases like that, and I know that you've talked before on other shows about escalation and whatnot, are you looking for kind of prior behaviors before those rapes? Because I know that what I'm trying to get at is I know that he was eventually linked to some ransackings in the
yes,
70s. And
yes.
so he went
So
from ransackings to rapes to murders.
yes, exactly. And yeah, that's what we would be looking for. Or if we don't have that information, we would tell investigators, might want to look for these types of crimes in this offender's history. But that was one of the things that I was asked to look at, was because there was a disagreement between some of the investigators in the working group as to whether the ransackings, which occurred about 4 hours or so from Sacramento and Visalia, California, were actually the work of the same offender as the East Area rapist who was attacking in San Francisco. And there were some detectives that felt very strongly they were connected, and there were others that felt like they were not connected. So that was something that, as a profiler, I wanted to look at and try to answer that question for them. What did I think?
So with minimal information like that, I mean, if you're looking at a burglary report, I assume you're looking at like method of entry and, the neighborhood, which I know that he was kind of consistent as far as choosing houses and whatnot. I mean, are you looking for those tangible things? Because there wasn't a lot of witness information at that time, correct?
There wasn't. In fact, I did review all of the burglary reports, and they were pretty short. It's just a few lines sometimes, and so you didn't always have a lot to go on. But there would always be, I don't want to say always, but I would find something like, for example, you mentioned like how the person would enter, and that, that's something to note. How did this burglar enter? And then compare that to, well, how did the rapist enter? The other thing, just looking for any similarities. And the other thing was in the Visalia ransacking, there were quite a few similarities that I found, but one of the things was this offender, or I should say, the offender in each of these series created what I would call like a makeshift alarm system. So in the Visalia ransackings, in a couple of reports, it was noted that fragile objects such as a cup or glass or something was put on a doorknob, so that if someone came home while the offender was ransacking their home, it would fall off and it would break, and he would hear them and he'd know someone had come home. Well, kind of similar, the East Area rapist would put fragile objects on the backs of victims. And these were the male victims because he did attack couples, and he would tie them up and he'd put like cups or saucers on the backs of the male victims and tell them if they moved, then the objects would fall and break, and he'd hear and he'd come back and kill them. So that was a similarity, this idea of a makeshift alarm system. There were also things that were noted in the report, such as, oh, one earring from a pair was missing, and the offender in Sacramento also did that. So you start to see some of these unique behaviors that are not necessarily, I guess you could say it is conducive to getting away with the crime, but stealing one pair of an earring or one earring from a pair isn't really conducive to financial gain. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's odd behavior. So you're looking for those types of things in the cases and looking for connections that way. And there were just a lot of those odd little similarities.
Can you explain to people of why burglary and kind of those voyeuristic crimes are significant to serial murders?
Sure, there is a very strong correlation between between burglary and sexual aggression. Now, most burglaries are committed for financial gain, but you have this segment that are not committed necessarily for financial gain. They might be committed more for power, sexual gratification of sorts, and it has been studied extensively. And there are a lot of serial sexual murderers who started out as burglars, and there is a real power and control that an offender gets by going into someone's home and occupying their space and taking things from them that maybe don't make sense, or in this case, that this offender ransacking their home and really letting them know, I am violating you, I am going into your home and there's nothing you can do, and I'm ransacking everything, and I'm doing all these odd things that don't make sense, and it gives me power and control over you. And that can be very sexually gratifying to a certain type of offender. And some burglars, or at least in some studies, there is a real sexual component to the burglary. And one burglar has said that just entering into a home gave him, a sexual release. I know that sounds hot. It's,
Yeah,
it's hard for us to understand that,
right.
but certainly we see it, we study it, we know that that's a fact, and killers themselves have told us such things, and we have to consider that when we're considering these types of crimes, that perhaps this is how they got started.
Wasn't it true that the act of killing itself isn't as gratifying to some as the stalking, the being so with Golden State, he took his time in the houses, and I wanted to ask you this whole stacking plates on or dishes on the male victims and kind of more or less taunting them and controlling them with power and fear. Do you think he intentionally chose houses that had males in it inside?
Yes, I
Or
do.
okay,
I do. And yeah, I don't think that that was an accident. I don't think the male victims were, these incidental obstacles. I think they were key to his fantasy, and his fantasy of being, in power and in control. And what better way than to overpower another man? And that really shows how tough and bold and efficient and effective that he is, when in real life he likely doesn't feel that way or come across that way.
it reminds me of prison. I was talking with William Noguera, who was in San Quentin for 44 years and was housed with Joseph Naso as well as Richard Ramirez. And that's kind of some of the stories that he was telling, is like the rape isn't about being a homosexual. It's about just completely dominating a man, because that's the most dominant thing, I guess, they could do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's for some offenders, the overt sexual act is important. To other offenders, it's not. They're all different. And for example, Dennis Rader described, the stalking part of it more gratifying than the actual murder itself. And Dennis Rader never actually sexually assaulted his victims. I mean, there was certainly a sexual component to his crimes, but it just goes to show you don't need that overt sexual act for it to have a sexual component or be sexually motivated. And you have to consider, like, we can't think of it in the way of like normal people. What would be for a normal person, and I just use that, in quotes, normal, because what is really normal. But um, you know everybody is different. And so for Joe DeAngelo, I think he got great sexual satisfaction. And this was almost his foreplay of the ransacking. That was so important to his crimes. He never sexually assaulted the female victim until after he had ransacked, and sometimes for a significant period of time. Not one time. It was a key component to his crime. And I don't think he could have actually committed a sexual assault without that ransacking component, because there was one case where he took a female victim out of her home. Why he did this, I don't know. He tied her to a tree. He tried to sexually assault her. It didn't work. He stood up, he kicked her, and he said something like, "This isn't working." He kicked her and then he ran off. And to me, that just showed, by omitting that ransacking component, just made the entire crime unsatisfactory to him. And so, everybody is different in these crimes. And what one offender fantasizes about, it can be very different from what another offender fantasizes about.
So I've heard that with him as well, he would call his victims afterwards to taunt them. And sometimes he would actually call them beforehand. Is that true? And can you explain that?
So I cannot verify if that's true or not.
Okay.
The There were some victims, not all of them, in fact, not most of them, but there were some victims who did receive phone calls. Not, I think some claim to have received some strange calls prior to their attack, and then certainly some have said that they received calls after and that it sounded like him. And there's one message that was left on a recording, and that is became very well known and played often. But I don't think anyone ever verified for a fact that that was him. But even if it was him, it wouldn't surprise me that he would do that, because that is just a way to prolong his sadistic torture of the victims, either, leading up to it, fantasizing about it, or after the fact, calling them and continuing to torment them. But as far as having actual proof or him ever admitting that he did that, we don't. So I did not consider that in my analysis. But again, if it was him, it wouldn't have changed my thoughts about him. And if it's not him, it didn't change anything either.
And so, one question about that as well, too, with Dennis Rader, he would taunt the police and newspapers with letters, and he made his ciphers, which I've seen some people claim that they've solved, and we could get into that later. But is there a difference?
Are you talking about
between,
Zodiac or BTK?
No, I'm talking about BTK.
Okay.
About chapter, I believe it's called Chapter 8 is the cipher.
Okay. Yeah.
Again, I probably shouldn't bring it up because I don't believe that people have solved these. But anyway, is there a difference between someone actually writing a letter and making phone calls in your eyes, or is it the same type of taunt or them trying to gain control? What would you make of that?
Well, writing a letter and spending time doing that, certainly you're devoting more time to it and more effort. So it's probably to more ritualistic behavior. Picking up the phone, making a call, yes, there's probably some ritualistic behavior involved in that, but it's not as extensive. I think they probably both serve the same purpose, but you just maybe have somebody who wants to devote a little more time to the act itself by sitting down and writing a letter and communicating in that way, versus somebody who is just going to pick up the phone and make a taunting phone call. But I do think it serves the same purpose, which is, number one, it gets some attention if they're seeking that, and it torments the victims, so it feeds into their sadistic nature and desires. So I think they serve the same purpose. It's just, you just have, an offender who's willing to spend more time on that effort. It's prioritized behavior.
And I know we're jumping around here a little bit, but with Golden State, there's a lot to it. Was the profile that you created, he ends up being a police officer and then later a mechanic. Was that in the realm that you were looking at? Or
Yes.
you were?
I
What
mean, I didn't
pointed
know
to
for sure that he'd, be
police
a
officer?
mechanic. There are aspects to his crime that I felt showed training that a police officer would have, particularly his use of a firearm. He was comfortable with it. He escalated directly to deadly force when he engaged in a confrontation. He was accurate with his weapon in high stress situations. The way he entered the homes, the way he shined his flashlight in the victim's eyes, it was just all to get a tactical advantage. And there were so many of those things about him and his ability to evade law enforcement. I thought he likely had law enforcement training. And I certainly thought he had formal firearms training of some kind. There's always the possibility, well, he just did he just was good at these things because he had done them. But, in his first murder, he was extremely efficient. And I thought he has prior training. This isn't from having committed a number of murders. This is because he's been trained and he's well prepared. So those were some of the things that led me to believe he might have been a police officer at one time.
Can you explain the gap or him stopping? Because there's a large gap between his last murder and when he was actually arrested. Do you think that was just because as a police officer, he realized that with, DNA and technology, that things are evolving? Did I know that you disagree with this, that, or you did at the time, and you were right about him being possibly dead. I know the common theme is always, well, they are arrested or they're in a mental institution. Kind of what were your explanations for that long gap?
Well, I don't know. And I still don't know why he actually stopped. So anything at this point would be speculation, but he was getting older. He was raising a family. His last murder was really about the time where DNA was being used in criminal investigations and leading to the conviction of other serial offenders. So these things are all developing about the time of his last murder. Plus he's, and I've already said this, he's getting a little older, and it's, what he was doing required quite a good, he had to be pretty physically fit to be prowling around, to outrun authorities as many times as he did, to break into homes, to um, subdue two or more victims, or one or more victims sometimes. So it was, those are sort of some of my thoughts. Now, he's never talked, so I don't know specifically why he stopped, but those would be my best educated guesses as to why. It could be a combination. It could be one of those things. He also had quite a gap between his second to last murder and his last murder. It was like a 4-year gap. And that was, preceded by the birth of one of his children. So I just thought, well, maybe he was just busy with raising his family, and he just did not have the time or the ability to devote and spend the amount of effort that he was able to before he had a family.
It's so odd for you to even, to talk about things like this, because it's almost like he's not going fishing, or, not playing golf or whatever,
I
because
know.
you know, he's got to lay down his hobby for a little bit.
Yeah.
And not that
It
he's
does seem like that, doesn't it? Like, "Oh, I just, I got a bad hip now, so
right.
I
Oh, I
can't
can't
go
jump over
out
that
and
fence
jump fence."
anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Guess I'll hang it up.
And what really made me think that, well, first of all, statistically, I thought he had to be alive. And that's, a lot of our profiling is based on probabilities, on statistics. So I just thought statistically, he's got to still be alive. Statistically, he's probably not in prison. And he's not done anything where he's, somebody's been, linked to his DNA. So, I doubted he was arrested and in prison. Um, so, and then learning what we learned from Dennis Rader about why he stopped, and he basically stopped because he had to raise a family, and he could not spend the amount of time on his, quote unquote hobby. And so I thought that could very well be a reason. And, now that we identified him, we, they identified him, um, we know, what the time of his life, what was going on. And he had small children. So I have to think that that likely played a part in why he couldn't continue to do what he was doing. And he also was, during a lot of the crimes he was committing, particularly in Sacramento, he was a police officer. So that kind of gave him that freedom to be out and about that he might not have had once he lost his position with the police department and then had more of a steady 9 to 5 predictable job. So that might have played a part as well. Again, this is all speculation on my part because I don't know. for a fact why.
So
But what we can tell from that is that they can stop.
right.
So it's a choice. They can choose to stop, and sometimes it's just merely for self-preservation.
Yeah, and that's why I always wonder, like, do they really stop or do they just go somewhere else and do the same thing? But you're pretty confident that he went cold turkey.
I think he stopped. Yeah, he didn't kill again. I'm pretty sure about that. Now, did he, you know, peep into windows or prowl or commit burglaries? Possibly, but there is nothing that I've seen that connects him. And I will say that with him, he was so his pattern was so similar in all of his crimes. It was like the same thing every single time. So if there were other cases out there, I think we would know about them. I don't think he had the ability to alter or change his MO or his ritual the way maybe some other offenders are able to do. And so I don't think there's anything he did after 1986. I could be wrong. There might be something that's not identified, but I have not seen a case that I thought this could be him. Now, prior to the Visalia ransackings, I think there were other cases linked to him, some other burglaries that when I did the profile, I wasn't aware of. But looking back, I think it was probably him.
So when they did take the DNA that they had and put it through a genealogical database, and you're essentially looking at what's called like a reverse family tree. Were you a part of that?
No,
Okay. I was
no.
just
Once you do your profile, you're
you're
done.
done. I didn't know if
Pretty
they
much, yeah.
called you up and they're like, "Hey, we've limited, this down some."
So
They
I knew there was something going on, but it really is, we are consultants. We are not part of the investigation. We don't do the interviews. We really just we provide our report if there are changes or updates to something, that you may continue to work with the departments, but after that, after my report was completed, I wasn't part of the actual investigation itself. That was all the detectives.
That's such an interesting case. All right, so we're gonna jump to a more recent case, or at least more recent in the media with Gilgo Beach and Rex Huron. Um, can you tell us when you got involved in that case? I know that you weren't the lead. Your co-host of the consult was. Um, but can you give us a little bit of a rundown?
Yeah, so my colleagues got involved pretty early on after they found the first four victims. And BAU was consulted very early on, and there was not a lot known at the time. And then they found additional victims, and we looked at those as well. But that was our involvement just early on, and then no further involvement after the initial consultations.
So one of the things that I found interesting about that case is 10 bodies were found in a very short distance, I guess you would say. But he's only been linked to four of them. I know that you've talked about, well, this is kind of um, a good place to dump a body, more or less. Is that
Yeah. I
kind
mean,
of what people are feeling?
well, so he's been linked to more now, but at the time, the first four that were found, they were pretty distinctive. Like there was a lot of similarities to how they were found. And the other bodies were maybe in a condition or in a location where we didn't have enough behaviorally to link them to a common offender. And then something you have to take into consideration is, is this a place that maybe bodies will be found things like that you have to consider. So we just couldn't link them all at the time to a common offender, and not responsibly. I think the thing that we also had to consider was several of them were found in a fairly contained area, and so I think we thought, they're probably connected, but other than saying that they were just found in a common area, or a close proximity, we really couldn't say much more than that at that time. So we tend to err on the side of caution.
And since you didn't have any crime scene, or besides where the bodies were located, but you didn't have an actual crime scene where they were murdered, because I assume you didn't believe they were murdered in that spot,
Right.
right? So are you
Yes.
just looking at victimology and trying to link it that way, or what are you looking at?
Yes, exactly. Well, first of all, how they're found. Are they found in the similar conditions? Do we know what their cause and manner of death are? Are they those similar? If that can be determined, looking at certainly at their victimology. When were they last seen? Who were they, last seen with? All of those things. And what does make cases like this difficult is that you're dealing with high risk victims who maybe we don't always know their last location, or not specifically, or we don't always know who they last had contact with. And because they have contact with strangers, people that aren't in their inner circle, that just makes it much more difficult to link. But certainly there was similar victimology for several of these victims, and seemed to be that they had at least disappeared from the city.
What were you able to gather as far as a profile through the information that you had?
Not a lot, but I mean, just some of the what we thought. And I should say is really more, my colleagues Bob and Susan, because they really were more involved in it. But our assessment was that the offender likely worked in the city and lived out closer to where the bodies were found, and likely had a home or something where he had private space that he could kill his victims, and then uh, easily discard them where they were found. So those were just our general observations at the time. And like I said, we were dealing with very preliminary information and very early on in the investigation. So we really couldn't say much more of that at the time, or much more than that at the time.
Were you able to determine what race he was and like an age range?
I think we did. I just don't recall. I think based on the location, and I think we thought probably white male, but I just don't remember. I'd have to look back and see what we said.
So you're giving this to the local police who have jurisdiction of the case, right?
Yes.
And
Yes, it's their investigation, not ours. We only provide our observations to them.
so it's more up to them to be able to continue to bring you details of the case and some feedback of what they're getting.
Yes.
And did that happen was there a continued flow of information?
No, we were not involved anymore after that preliminary consultation.
Is that common for departments, or are most departments more cooperative?
It depends. It's not uncommon. Sometimes you have departments that you just do an initial consultation with, they don't call you back. And then there are other departments that you may work sometimes several months with them on a case, sometimes all the way through to prosecution, It really just depends on the agency, on the department. There's so many different factors. But it's not uncommon. It was not uncommon for us to do a preliminary um, consultation, and that was all they asked for. And we only provide what we're asked to provide. We don't, despite TV shows, we can't just take over or insert ourselves in an investigation without being invited.
Oh, so you don't sit down with the suspect right afterwards and he starts telling you about every crime he's committed? Does that work that
I
way?
wish. Oh, I wish it was that easy. No, we don't. And, that's the one thing I always would tell investigators. I think sometimes some agencies that maybe had misconceptions about what our role would be, that this is their investigation. It remains their investigation. All we're doing is providing an assessment to them. They can take it or leave it. They can use what they want. They can throw out the rest. And, that's it. And we could offer suggestions. And a lot of times we will offer suggestions and see, other successful investigations, what worked in those investigations, or what we know from our own experience or from the research. And we can provide some investigative suggestions. They don't have to follow up on those if they don't want to, if they don't see fit. It is their case. They know about it way more than we do. So they need to decide what works for them and what doesn't. So that's a big, I think, misconception, is that we just come in and take over and that we're out there interviewing the offenders and making the arrests, and not at all. Now, occasionally we would help with interview strategies of the offenders, and but rarely would we actually participate in an interview.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things everyone imagines is this whole, Julia is sitting down and breaking down the offender and, get him to cry about his, his past when he
I
was
did
9
that in
years
my
old.
own cases. I made a couple people cry, believe it or not.
Oh my gosh,
So,
that's
yeah,
so
I
funny.
I made a guy cry. It was pretty funny. But yeah, not in my role at BAU. That is not my job. As much as sometimes, you just want to take over and like, let me do it, you are there to provide a service, and it's their investigation and it remains their investigation.
Do you believe that he was responsible for all 10 murders? With your gut feeling? I know you're not basing this on all the information that the investigation or investigating agency has, because you don't have access to that. But from just what's been put out in the media and your limited time of working on the case, do you believe that he is responsible for all 10 or more than four?
Yes, I
So,
do. And and people who listen to our show know how cautious we are. So this really is just my gut. I
right.
don't have, like, in some of these cases there's DNA. So, I feel good about that. But I've always felt that because of the locations, that there's likely a connection. But we have to be cautious with what we say. We need to have more than that. But yes, I do believe he's responsible for more than just the original four that we looked at.
And maybe this is kind of in general terms and a stretch, but when he dumped his vehicle in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, would investigators ever look at that area for crimes that are consistent with what he's doing in New York? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Anytime you have an offender that, especially has committed a series of crimes, you, I mean, investigators would want to find out other areas they've been. Are there any unsolved cases in those areas? You have to. It would be irresponsible not to look in those areas to see if you can link him to any other cases.
So another off-subject question, but I've got to ask, is there any case now that's currently unsolved that is your great white whale, as some people say?
Well, the murder of Philip DiMartino is what is the case. I mean, it's hard to pick one because you feel like you're neglecting a
Right.
family somewhere. But Philip's case was the first case I ever profiled. I remember it so well. It was a big It was just a big moment in my own career, and the case always stuck with me. It remains unsolved. It is extremely solvable. There is offender DNA was left at the crime scene, and there is no doubt that it's the offender's DNA. It's just a matter of finding whose it belongs to. And I think every day, some days, I think this is the day that maybe I'm going to hear something that they have linked it to an offender. So that would probably be, but I feel even guilty saying that because there are so many unsolved cases out there that I would love to see solved. And even cases I haven't worked on, and I see the news where, forensic genetic genealogy helps solve another case. I am just always so thrilled when I see that. I just think, yes, so, somebody out there is not getting away with what they did. But I guess with Philip's case is just very personal to me in a way that um, I guess I shouldn't say personal because I try not to get too personal, but it just means a lot to me.
Is that something where you're able to follow up with the investigators in that case or stay in touch or
So
um,
it's a different investigator now, and I have been in contact, but they cannot share information with me. It
do you
is
know if they've done anything with genealogy?
They have. They're working on
And
the
still
issue, I believe, with the case is that the offender, in my opinion, is likely foreign born and may come from a country that's underrepresented in these databases, and it's
Mhm.
becomes more challenging. Um, so where it stands or how much has been done, I am not privy to that. Um, all I know is what I can kind of assume is going on, and I do believe it will be solved someday. I just think it takes a lot of legwork. I think we have gotten used to thinking, "Oh, that's just gonna answer all our questions," and it's not always that easy. There's a lot of legwork that can go into, trying to identify these offenders through forensic genetic genealogy. Some cases are easier than others, and this case, I think, is just particularly challenging.
So after the your stint with the FBI, you took on another challenge of getting into podcasting. I know that you did a few things before that, right? I believe you
I
worked
did.
with UMass Amherst, correct?
Yes, I did. I worked there for a few years after I retired and then left that position to concentrate full time on the podcast.
Can you tell me about that? Like, what drove you to get into podcasting? You've got your colleagues that are your co-hosts. Did you have to sell them on that, or were they on board
Not
right away?
really. No, they were pretty supportive. So before I retired, I had some of the younger agents that I worked with. They were listening, well, at least one in particular listened to Jerry Williams' podcast, and she's a retired FBI agent who interviews other retired FBI agents about their cases. And he loved her show, and he and I was already listening. I started listening to podcasts, and the agent said, "Have you ever heard of Jerry Williams' show?" And I hadn't heard of it, and I thought it was fantastic. So that just kind of put the idea in my head, and then other coworkers are like, "You should do your own podcast." And then when I retired, they got me, which I think was kind of a gag gift, but they got me a set of 24 mugs that said "The Consult," which is what another one of my colleagues decided that would be the name of it. Because we'd always go to consult. Hey, can you come to my consult? We're going to have a consult. So it just became the consult.
So cool.
Yeah, so they got me these mugs, and I'm like, well, now that I have merch, I have to do a show. And I had no idea what I was doing. I still don't know what I'm doing, but
Please.
I talked to Susan and Bob and Angela, and they were on board. I don't remember having to like twist their arms at all to do it. And I said, we'll just talk about cases we worked on. Let's just see what happens. And I said, this is to educate people and maybe bring attention to some of these lesser known cases, and just talk about it like we were still at the BAU.
That's what I found really cool. It reminded me of being a rookie police officer and the detective lets you like sit in on the interview, or you're sitting in on the group of, detectives when they're talking about the case, and you just feel like you know, you're like part of the team almost, or,
You are.
or being
That's it.
yeah,
Our listeners are supposed to, I tell them, like, you got to profile along with us. What do you think as we're kind of going through it? What are your thoughts? And then hopefully they're building upon all the concepts we've talked about.
right.
So I mean, I kind of feel like at this point, our very loyal listeners who've been with us from the beginning, that they know, like, if it's a case where some people speculate it might be multiple offenders, I think they know we're going to say this is a single offender. This isn't multiple, because that's typically, what and it ends up being statistically. So I think most of our loyal listeners are becoming really good profilers themselves.
Yeah, and I really think that for guys or girls that are in law enforcement,
Different strengths. We have a tremendous amount of respect for one another, even though we don't always agree on everything. And we love doing the show. We loved working together at BAU. We love doing the show together. I think that's another big reason. It just gets us back together. And we all loved our work so much. And this gives us an opportunity to continue to do it and to continue to talk about these concepts, talk about some of the misconceptions and um, the profiling concepts that we apply. And what we hope is that the people will learn something, but like, you already pointed out, but we have young people that are interested in going into law enforcement or interested in behavioral analysis that listen to our show. We have law enforcement that listens to our show. Some have brought cases to us. It's very rewarding that people are listening to our show to learn something. And hopefully along the way, at some point, our show will help bring attention to a lesser known case, and maybe somebody will come forward, and maybe that'll help at least lead to some kind of resolution at some point.
so if someone was trying to get into the BAU, they're a young person that's listening, what advice would you give them? And is there a pathway as far as what degrees or background they should have?
hmm Well, there is no one path. Anybody who's in the BAU, they have to be an agent first. You have to get into the FBI, and the FBI is very diverse. And so you can come from any background at all. And there are former law enforcement and in the FBI. There are lawyers. There are former forensic scientists. There was somebody that was a Walmart manager, school teachers, bankers. I mean, you name it, any career. As you know, and what I would think the most important thing is that you have demonstrated that you can hold a position of responsibility for a length of time and do well. You've shown that you can be successful in any career that you've chosen. So that is the most important thing. And once you're in the FBI, you have to kind of just do whatever they tell you to do at first and approach it with a positive attitude. And that is also, I think, a number one thing, because I did not have a violent crime background in terms of what violations I worked in the FBI. And I thought, well, now I'll never get into BAU because that's all violent crime that they do. And I'm working public corruption, civil rights, white collar. But I was also a member of the evidence response team. So I still did go to crime scenes. So that was how I kept my foot in violent crime. But here's the thing I want to remind people of: never discount opportunities that you're given, or think you're not being given a great opportunity. Because when I applied to the BAU, one of the things that they were looking for was somebody with a strong white collar background. Because at that time, they were, Susan, my partner on the show, she was heading up a research project on high level white collar offenders. And we wanted to study them at BAU because of the crimes committed by Bernie Madoff. That was an impetus for this research project. And so when they were canvassing and for my position, they were looking for someone with a very strong background in white collar crime, in addition to having a background in violent crime. So at the time I joined the FBI, I thought, I'll never get into BAU because I'm a white collar agent. And in the end, it benefited me. And so never think that like the opportunities that you're given are not going to benefit you in the future. Just take those opportunities, do your best at them. And, I am a firm believer that if you do well, then you will have success. So that's my, I just can't even, who would have thought that they would be looking for a white collar agent? And sure enough,
You need
that's
to
how I
have
got.
that on like a T-shirt or something. I think that's a good slogan.
I mean, it still is unbelievable to
Right.
me so that's what I'm saying. You don't have to have a specific background. You don't have, and an agent did tell me when I was newer and I was hoping to someday be in the BAU, a profiler at the time, long since retired, but had said, the most important thing is you become a good investigator. Don't worry about your violations. Just become a good investigator, and it'll all fall into place for you. And I thought, oh yeah, right. But okay, I'll do my best. But he was right, and so I pass that on to everybody as well. No matter what your assignment is, you do your best at it. People will notice that. They will give you more opportunities when they see that you're working hard at like a really crappy job or a job nobody else wants to do. They see you working hard. That's the type of person other people want to work with. Other people want to work for them. And so I think that is the most important thing, no matter what. And rather than sitting around complaining about what you're not getting, just make the most of what you have.
I mean, I think that's good life advice for anyone, no
Yeah.
matter what field you're in.
Yeah, and I can say that now because I'm old. I can say sometimes I didn't always feel like, "Oh, this is how come this happened to me?"
Well, you've had this amazing career, and I think the Consult is awesome. It's one of my favorite shows, honestly.
Thank you.
I'm surprised that this has not turned into a Netflix series or you're not doing a speaking circuit. I mean,
Oh, I don't know. I think I'm too lazy for all of that. But I think part of it too is that our show is, we're, I don't want to say boring, because I don't think it's boring if you really like the subject matter, but we're just not sensational.
I think that
And
is right. I completely agree with you because if you watch Discovery or Peacock, some of those channels with the crime shows and the detectives like, "Oh, we always get our man," or some cheesy, line like that. You're not doing that. And I like of how you do have restraint when you're talking about these cases. You're not you're not saying things to get clickbait. You're actually going by the evidence that you have. And I feel like your entire team is on board with that. And so with some people, I've never heard anyone say that it was boring. I don't see how you could watch that show and think that, but it's definitely, your show is not one that's chasing clicks or sound bites. You're actually having honest conversations about the case, and that's something I appreciate, because I
Yeah.
know when I'm listening to it, I'm going to learn something and learn more or less what actually happened, or at least what some factual information, um, or well researched thoughts and ideas, and not just what's been passed around on social media.
Yeah, I think when it comes to profiling a case, and maybe I shouldn't say boring, but if we say something like this in our reports, when we would write reports, if we say something about the characteristics of an offender, we have to back that up. What do we see in his behavior at the crime scene or the interaction between the offender and the victim that makes us say this about this offender? So you have to back it up. And so if we can't back something up, like you were asking me, do I think all the cases are related to or by the same offender at Gilgo Beach? Yeah, I think they probably are. But can I really back that up with each and every case? I can't. So I can't say it. But yeah, does my gut say yeah? And I can say that, but I just wouldn't have any evidence. And there has been more evidence to come, to link more of these cases together, but originally we just couldn't. And I think that's how we try to do the show. We have to be able to back up what we say based on what we know. And we're not ever always going to know everything. Some cases we have a lot of the facts. A few cases we've done, we just don't have enough facts to say something with any certainty. So I think that's why we tend to just be cautious, because if you say something about somebody, you have to say, well, why do I think this? Well, here's where they demonstrated this characteristics in the commission of their crime.
And you're
So,
getting departments to actually get on board and provide you like crime scene photos and whatnot for you to be able to review, or parts of the case file, or what are you basing um, the information on?
yes, in some cases, we do have the crime scene photos, we have investigative reports, autopsies. It's really tough to do a case without those things. We have done some cases on the show where we didn't have all of that information. We say it outright. We don't have this information, so we can't really speak to this. But there are some cases I just wanted to bring attention to, so we covered them. But yes, the bare minimum for me, like we need an autopsy report. We need crime scene photos if available. We need as much victimology as possible. No case, even at BAU, are we going to always have all of that, everything that we want. There are always questions that remain. But and you have to, just know what you don't have, and you have to remember and say that this could change. Analysis could change if there's additional information that's provided that we don't have at this point. So that's why profiling isn't exact.
So, what's the future of the show? Are you just going to stay with the podcast,
Just
or?
treading water.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So my goal when I started, I thought, well, I'm going to try to get to 100 episodes and then see where we're at. And we just surpassed 100. We're up now. This Wednesday will be our 111th episode. So now it's just, I think, just continue to do it until we really want to retire for real. So I don't know when that'll be. We have a lot of cases I still want to look at. So it's really just now just continuing to do it until we're just not going to do it anymore. And I don't have an end in sight.
Well, how can we support you, and how can people get in contact with you and watch your show?
So it's the Consult Real FBI Profilers. We're on all of the podcast apps. So they can find us anywhere. And we have a website, truecrimeconsult.com. And then my email is theconsultpodcast@gmail.com. If people have case suggestions, I keep a running list and they're in various stages of research because the first thing I have to do is to see if we can even cover the case, because some cases there's just not enough information. We can't do them responsibly. So but I keep a list of all the case suggestions. So that's how people can reach out.
And
And
I
that's how they
believe
can listen to our show.
you also have a Patreon channel, right?
I do. We have a Patreon where you can get early and ad-free access to our episodes, patreon.com/theconsultpod. So, they come out a few days early and there's no ads. So, which some people really like. Some people hate the ads, but the ads, like, I like doing the ads. I'm like, so it's so funny that, like when you're doing the show and you finally get ads, because we originally started, we had no ads, but that is kind of exciting to be able to have ads, because now that those ads in our Patreon help support the research we do for the show. Like, I'm able to FOIA documents, and the show kind of pays for itself now, whereas before I was using my pension to buy
Right.
documents sometimes. So it's really ex- that is exciting that we are able to actually do the show and support the show, and that's all. I don't do it for a ton of money. You're never going to make a lot of money in podcasting
Right.
unless you're a huge show. But to be able to get the research document, I mean, we buy, because we don't have access anymore the way we did through the FBI. We have, I can buy research papers that support our analyses. I mean, it's just so much more I can do now with the show, now that it's growing a little bit.
What's very cool. I'd highly recommend it. It's The Consult, and make sure everyone checks that out. If you want to support me, you can follow me on Santana True Crime on Instagram and TikTok. And you can also buy my book, A Murder on Campus, A Professor, the Cop, and North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case. And lastly, you can like and subscribe and follow to Santana True Crime. Julia, thank you very much, and good night.